Hello, my name is Erica Driver. I work for a nonprofit in the St. Louis area as a project manager for youth and services programs in St. Louis area servicing St. Louis City, St. Louis County, as well as Madison County and St. Clair County, Illinois, for youth ages 5 to 24. And the programs I offer cover workforce development, resource and wellness services, after-school services, summer camp, youth leadership academy, and sexual health education. The project for this class I focus on, it was called Keep Moving Forward, in which I provided services for 10% of the students in St. Louis Public School with transitional housing when their housing situation became unstable. And that was only for youth who were not necessarily candidates for the foster care system, but they were about to become homeless. There was a lot of collaboration necessary for this project, such as working with the City Housing Authority, working with St. Louis Public Schools, the community-based organizations, construction companies, and the child care authorities for St. Louis City and Missouri. During this project, there were a lot of things that we covered in this course that were applicable to that project as well as my own personal work experience. I'm going to speak about 10 of those things that were takeaways for me during this course. However, we're going to stick to the scope line because I know I had more than 10. All right, first was outlining the tangible and intangible benefits of a project. You have to define what the purpose of your project is and what you can do and what you can't do, and what's an actual benefit to your project and what's not an actual benefit to the project. So like working with my proposed project, a tangible benefit was that youth receive housing if necessary. Intangible benefit would be that the students would have a better attendance rate or they would have better attitudes at school. But that all moved into the next point of ensuring that the project will solve the right problem for the end user. So we all can come up with a multitude of things that we think need to be solved, but if it's not actually applicable to the end user who has to use it, it doesn't really do anything. I talked about this in my course paper, but as well as with a lot of IT companies, typically they are known for creating these new database systems that everybody needs to utilize, but in actuality it boils down to staff needs retraining. So make sure that we always look at what the actual problem is and not what we think the problem is. And with that, way you can actually figure that out is fleshing out who your stakeholders are in the project, who your end users are and who's affected, not just the sponsor who has all the money, but who the end user of the project, because it directs the project and indicates the potential success rate for that project. And with that, you have to keep a balance. For me, it's about keeping a balance between business and social services, because a lot of what I do is business related because I have funders who are private, foundations, in-kind dollars, or other businesses. And so I have to be conscientious of make sure I'm balancing them so that one does not overrun the other. Finally, I think we're at number 5, utilize a Microsoft project. I love that system. I was in love because what it had was a lot of tools that I've used before, but I created them in Word because I didn't have project, and most nonprofits don't have projects. So seeing it, I've already put in a request to buy the software. I even showed my manager how it works, and she loved it. Specifically, she loved my 6th thing. The takeaway is the work breakdown structure. It's easy to follow it, but clearly you have to put process and thought into sequencing the activities. We've actually been utilizing the work breakdown structure in my organization for quite some time, but we just didn't call it the WBS. We just called it the needs of the project. Specifically, we have a massive project we do every year in the St. Louis area where we bring about 2,000 kids together, either at the Chaffetz Arena or the Scottish Rite Cathedral, in which they are bombarded with all educational information regarding making positive, healthy choices. And the logistics of the bus, just as the logistics of the food service, who's performing when, payment schedules for everything, how many hours we're going to have to allocate to that project, all of those things involved, or part of the work breakdown structure, because we have to think of all those little bitty nuances that we don't typically think of when you're thinking about an event. Next was the forward and backwards technique. That's my 7th takeaway. And I didn't like it originally because with my project, all the examples we've received or seen, they dealt with projects that were like 20 and 40 days long. Well, my project, or proposed project, was 615 days long. It's almost 2 years to implement it. projects I work on now last 1 to 5 years. So necessarily forwards and backwards technique, it's applicable when it's with smaller projects, but when you try to apply it to the larger project, I ran into negative numbers. So I had to think about that and figure out the best way to lump some things together so that those numbers would be smaller and more palatable for my project. Next is the labor and equipment charts. Loved it. But with a lot of the things that I do, I have to do a bit of fancy budgeting, to say the least. I do a lot of in-kind, allocating 50% full-time to this, 50% full-time to that, because if I didn't, the actual cost of labor for each of those little components would be astronomical. And a lot of funding that we do receive don't necessarily need a full-time person to do it, because if I have a full-time person who has the skills and basis to do it, or I have the equipment already, I don't want to charge that grant provider for that equipment that I already have. So you have to be careful of that and mindful of that when you're planning a project, doing the budget for grants, or doing the budgets in general. The ninth thing was other resources to assist in communication. Communication tools. I have a gamut of staff that range from traditional staff that are about 70 years old down to generation of millennials. And all of the youngest one I have now is 18, 17, 18. And so the communication tools that I utilize, my traditionalist is not going to use it. I just got him into a smartphone. I still have a staff member that uses a BlackBerry. Yes, I said a BlackBerry. And so me saying, hey guys, let's download the Monday app and use it to make sure this project flows and goes this way, it's not going to necessarily be applicable for my traditionalist who has a big flip phone, and then my other staff who has a BlackBerry who can't download that app. So you have to be cognizant of that when you're developing your stuff, and make sure across the skill and knowledge level that and experience level that what tools you're implementing are actually applicable for your staff and for your project. The 10th thing for my takeaway was the conflict resolution chapter. I love the different tools that we were introduced to. I actually read the chapter twice, because working with schools, it can be a very fluid situation. And personalities tend to conflict a lot when you're working with people. So make sure that your communication is transparent and that you're consistent is key to resolving a lot of the problems that can occur with projects. I know with my own staff, make sure that I'm transparent in my communication and consistent with it also helps me to enable to allow them to be more independent and not micromanage them when they're doing the work. So those were the 10 takeaways from this course. My personal mantra for this project, it took me a little while to get to it. I started to think about, I've named my project after my favorite movie, Keep Moving Forward. But really, I think for this, I think the project management mantra for me is look, listen, and keep moving forward.